Now let us move to the interactive session, and from now on I would like to open the floor. これからインタラクティブセッションに直接入っていきたいと思います。フロアをオープンしますので、どなたでも結構ですので、この佐久先生はじめパネリストの皆さん、ご質問とかご意見がございましたら、ぜひご発言をお願いしたいと思います。一つお願いがございまして、発言にあたりましては、皆さんの所属とお名前を言っていただきまして、質問はできるだけ簡潔に、そしてどなたに対するご質問か、ということを明らかにしていただいた上で、ご発言をしていただきたいと思います。発言にあたりましては、お手元のテーブルの上のマイクがあると思いますので、そういったものを使っていただけたらと思います。それではどなたからでも結構ですので、ご意見、ご質問のある方は挙手をお願いをいたします。どうぞ。
It's regarding the recent developments in carbon capture and sequestration technology, say the new coal plant in Kemper, Mississippi, and SaskPower in Saskatchewan, Canada. As these are untested technologies and we're not really sure of the scale, yet in the DDTP report, some countries have included those in their assessments. So I was wondering, what is your personal outlook on clean coal, CCS, and what does this mean for the DDPP in the future?
Good, thank you. And behind, one person from, please.
My question is also directed to Mr. Jeffrey Sachs and also to Mr. Endo. And I want to ask about the public-private partnership in terms of the economic development. So, Mr. Jeffrey Sachs, you mentioned about the PPP on the technical terms, however, and also in the economical terms, there could be some kind of public PPPs. Like, so, if the private companies get into the poor markets, and it can make a very good circulation of the money, they can have the start points to get rid of the extreme poverty. So, what do you think of introducing the private sectors into the economic development? Yes, that's my question. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Now, can I ask you to respond, Professor, please?
Oh, good. Yeah, thank you. All of these are in the same question, which is how does one allocate responsibility, or what kind of division of labor is there between the public sector, the private sector, civil society, academia in this multi-stakeholder society we live in? And I'll take carbon capture and sequestration actually as an illustration of the principle. So the idea of carbon capture and sequestration is to use coal or gas safely by capturing the carbon dioxide that is emitted when these fossil fuels are burned, and to store them underground. It is a technology that is applied right now at a very small scale. It's actually even a commercial technology, because carbon capture and sequestration is used for secondary oil recovery. To pump more oil, you put carbon dioxide into the oil reserve to force the pressure, increase the pressure and force more oil recovery. But this is a tiny application compared to the idea of storing billions of tons of carbon dioxide under the earth. It's a very interesting, strange world, because if you look at the scientific reports like the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they assume massive carbon capture and sequestration in the future. But if you ask companies about it, they say, oh, this is silly. We're not going to do it. It's too expensive. We're not interested in it. And so you have a big divide of opinion. Scientists say this is a great idea. Businesses say this is ridiculous. We don't even take it seriously. And then there are a few small projects that are testing it. My recommendation is that we need to determine whether this is a serious or not serious option. Because if it is a serious option, it has certain implications about the future of our coal industry. If it's not a serious option, we have to stop the coal industry, frankly, because it's not safe to use coal if you can't capture and sequester the carbon dioxide. So we should know this, but no private business is going to determine this on its own. It's not cost effective, it's scientifically unknown, it's not even legal to pump carbon dioxide under the ground in most places in the world because people don't like companies putting carbon dioxide in the earth without knowing what the consequences are. And so there are big legal questions as well. The only way to answer this question is through a large-scale research project. But the truth is, you can't even answer this question in just one place. Carbon capture and sequestration might work in Alberta, but not work in the United States or in India or in Japan or in China. So you have to test this in every geologic site to understand this. What kind of test needs to be done? You need power plants, engineers, geologists, monitoring. Many issues are involved here. And so we need an organized public-private effort to spend 10 years to study this issue intensively with the idea that if it works, it's going to be deployed, and if it doesn't work, it's going to be forgotten. Now, could such a big effort develop? Well, as I suggested, we had a public-private partnership to put a man on the moon, and that was very successful. If you could put a man on the moon, you could test carbon capture and sequestration. It's much easier, actually, than putting a man on the moon. And what we need is that kind of concerted effort. Next month, or actually not next month, next week, in fact, in exactly a week's time, I'm organizing a meeting in Washington together with the World Business Council on Sustainable Development and the International Energy Agency to start to develop a public-private partnership around carbon capture and sequestration. Now, the businesses will do certain things, the academia will do other things, government will provide some of the financing. And that kind of public-private partnership needs to be designed, and it has to be funded. And I'm proposing that half of the funding come from governments and half of the funding come from the business sector. So ExxonMobil and Saudi Aramco and Chevron and British Petroleum, I'm saying, you put up money, you're making too much money right now and not doing enough for the environment. So I'm expecting the oil industry to put at least $25 billion of its own money into this. And then I'm suggesting that Canada, the United States, Australia, the Gulf countries, China, India, I haven't asked the Japanese government yet, but maybe I will, should also put the other $25 billion, and that we test this at a significant scale. Now, that's just an example. Every kind of issue requires its own design. What is the private sector good at? Making money, mobilizing large investments, good organization, much better than all the rest of us, because businesses really know how to get things done at a large scale. Governments don't, academia doesn't, but business does. But academia is very good at research. Government is very good at setting principles, general principles, at requiring regulation. Civil society is very good at making public demands that politicians don't want to hear sometimes. So everybody has a role to play in this division of labor. it's very important to respect that division of labor. You can't say to business that you're a philanthropy. That won't work in the end, because business operates by making money. But you can't say to the government, be business, because government can't be business-like in many ways. And so this division of labor is extremely important, and good economic theory also can help you to assign the institutional responsibilities in a multi-stakeholder approach.
Good. Thank you very much.
I'm Inagaki, former JICA official working in Africa. When I work in Africa, you initiate Millennium Village. It was so impressive. I would like to know, in terms of this Millennium Development Goals, this Millennium Village in Africa initiative, how is it sustainable, and what is the prospect in the future for the end of the poverty in Africa?
Thank you very much, and please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my name is Kimiya Kawai from Soka International. My question goes to Professor Sachs, and thank you very much for your inspiring presentation. And I really impressed the way you explain how we can be involved in the process of the new SDGs, which is going to be set next year. But I'm an ordinary person, and from my perspective, the discussion process of the SDGs does not necessarily look so open to the general public, I think. So how can citizens be more informed and involved in the process of setting new SDGs, and in order to feel and to have more ownership? What's your suggestion? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
I think you really clearly indicated the program that the world community is now working on under your kind leadership. But there are two worries I have. One is what you said, there is no conductor. The second one is, suppose the last important step on the overarching question of climate change, COP21 at the summit level, I'm sure. Suppose it fails. Can you do something about the very clear indications of worsening the climate change situation? I think these are the two questions that I should like to answer. I think you have, yes, I think you have already acted as a kind of conductor on image building and reality learning. But if the crunch comes, what can you suggest? Can you be a conductor?
Thank you.
I'll start with this last point. It's so important, and these are, unfortunately, I'm told to be very brief, but they're complicated questions. I believe that COP21 must not fail. I don't have a backup plan, and I call it our last chance. Specifically, if COP21 fails, we will not keep the rise of temperature below 2 degrees Celsius. In fact, the whole multilateral system may fall apart on climate and on many other things if COP21 fails. We have lost already 22 years since signing the Framework Convention without an effective response. And I believe that next year, in practice, is the last chance. I say that because many people already believe it's failed. And so I don't think there will be a chance to say, give us one more chance, either next year or finish, in my belief. So I have a particular proposal for COP21 that I'm trying to advocate, which I've explained a bit in this Deep Decarbonization Pathways report that is online. It is basically the following 3 steps, very quickly. First, that all governments commit to deep decarbonization by mid-century, by 2050. but not legally binding, so that they don't feel that this is some kind of straitjacket, but they do have to show what is the strategy. So the government of Japan would have to say nuclear or not nuclear, carbon capture or not carbon capture, would at least have to show the intention. Then the legally binding part would be only up to perhaps the next 15 years, up to 2030. And the third component would be public-private partnerships for low-carbon technologies. Carbon capture sequestration, electric vehicles, advanced solar power, smart grids, and so forth. This is what we're trying to start developing next week in Washington. I believe that this kind of three-tiered structure could be politically acceptable to China, the United States, Europe, Japan, the Gulf countries, and so forth. The idea is not to force governments to legally commit to things that they don't know what they can do, but also to force them to the shared aspiration to decarbonize the energy system. The problem right now is that most governments do not have any idea of what it would really mean to achieve the 2 C target. Because that's not the job of the politician, as was explained. The job of the politician is a 5-year horizon, perhaps, or a 2-year horizon. But to achieve 2 C is a 30-year plan. So I want to force the governments to put on the table a plan. Even if it's not binding, they have to show the intention of what this is about. Interestingly, this idea of deep decarbonization pathways has found a lot of support among key governments in recent weeks. And without quoting them, I would say many of the major emitting countries have said that is a kind of approach we would support. And they like the technology roundtable approach also as a way to focus many more resources, $100 billion or more, into the research and development to speed the low carbon technologies. So I'm hoping that with a more, I would say, creative design of next year's agreement, we can actually get further. In political terms, and I'll just stop here, of course the key is for China and the United States to have a shared understanding. Because if China and the United States have a basic understanding, Japan, the European Union, and many other regions will say, thank God, there's some way forward. We can all figure out together then the specifics of these details. Up until now, the US said, we're not moving until China moves. And China said, you promised to go first, we're not moving until you move. And this has been 20 years of stalemate. From a legal point of view, China has been correct, because the United States signed an agreement in 1992 that said it would move first, and it never did. So China has been correct, but in a practical sense, China can no longer continue that approach, because China is now the world's largest emitting country. Its air is unbreathable. It emits twice what the United States does. So it can't say we're out of this, because China could wreck the world climate all by itself. It has to be an active participant. And I think both sides understand this now. But they're trying to find a practical way forward. And I think that if they do, this will change the politics in the United States also, because I can't go into detail, we don't have time. But I do believe that if China and the US diplomatically find a way forward, that it can be an approach with all of the major countries, of course, Japan, Korea, Russia, I don't know. It's still got its own issues, so I'm not even trying to figure that out, frankly. But the Gulf countries, the European Union certainly, and so on. I think that there really could be an agreement. But the single word answer, if Three-word answer: if COP21 fails, we're in trouble. Big trouble. Nobody has a good backup strategy, believe me. I talk to everybody in this business. Nobody has a backup strategy. So it better work next year, and we're only 14 months away. In terms of the other two questions, the SDG discussion has been relatively participatory, but of course it's very difficult to have complete public participation. One of the things I'm trying to help do through this SDSN is to have public discussions in each country in 2015 about how the Sustainable Development Goals would affect their own economy. So if we could have a public discussion in Japan, for example, with government and academia and public civil society institutions about what the SDGs would mean for Japan. Similarly, in many other countries, we're trying to get those underway. This could, I think, help the public ownership of them. They won't be achieved without broad public participation once they're set, but even before they're set, there should be a lot more consultation. And then with respect to the Millennium Villages in Africa, I want to thank the government of Japan for making the whole project possible, because Japan already in 2005, through the Human Security Trust Fund, was the core supporter of this project. It made the whole project possible. And I think it was a wonderful act of development assistance that has had a very big impact in Africa, because what the project has done is to help all the governments, there are 10 countries, to see practical approaches of what to do. The whole idea of the Millennium Villages is be practical, not just theory. Form farmer cooperatives, hire community health workers, build schools and clinics, bring information technology, develop off-grid or microgrid energy. And in all of the countries, the project has worked and has been quite supported by the host governments, which is quite good because it means that it's being scaled up now in these countries, and that is a big advantage. And I can just give one very quick example. The Millennium Village Project pioneered the use of community health workers with smartphone technologies. And actually, we use Sony Ericsson smartphones in the Millennium Villages Project through a donation of Sony that made it possible. This approach has been so successful that I was called last month by some of the governments in West Africa to help on the Ebola epidemic. And we have a team that is going to Guinea tomorrow, actually, to help implement Ebola control measures using the technologies that were developed in the Millennium Village Project. So that's really the purpose, to develop specific technologies that would scale up. And we'll do a final evaluation next year, but our assessment through the monthly data that we collect is that there has been a lot of advance, especially in the healthcare, in water, sanitation, schooling, education, gender equality, and agricultural productivity. So we're very pleased with what we see. Even more importantly, the governments are very pleased. And so I really want to thank the government of Japan, MOFA, JICA, and the Human Security Trust Fund. It's played a huge role.
Thank you very much. To make a better world, what kind of thing like private company like IBM could do apart from socially responsible investment and CSR activities? That's it.
This is Patrick Utley from Greenheart. We're an appropriate technology organization. So I'm not anti-technology, but I cringe sometimes.
Okay.
I cringe sometimes when I hear the new technology as a solution without qualifiers. I applaud your solutions in policy and governance and best practices. But I just wonder, this is for the whole panel, whether with a goal of a low carbon future, whether or not older, more proven technologies shouldn't, already available technologies are not more desirable given the unintended consequences sometimes of new technology.
Thank you very much.
遠藤先生に対してご質問があります。プレゼンテーションの中で資源管理ガバナンスを SDG と、それをフィジビリティを持って進めていくのが課題というふうにおっしゃっておりましたが、サックス先生がおっしゃっていたようにワールドビジネスカウンセラーとのミーティングや PPP の促進というのは多分そちらのフィジビリティを持ってというものに入っていくかと思われるんですけども、それ以外にですね、遠藤先生が考えられる、何か、資源管理ガバナンス等について、SDG に関連するものがありましたら、お話しいただけたらなと思います。
はい、ありがとうございます。SDGs の中の目標の一つとして、先ほど挙げていただいた中にグッドガバナンスという項目があって、これは広くSDGs を促進推進していくグローバルなネットワーク、ステークホルダーとかマルティエアとかいろんなアクターがいると思いますけれども、ここでその資源管理ということに関して、申し上げようと思ったのは、アフリカにおけるそのガバナンスの弱さというような問題がどうしても産油国とかですね、資源を産出する地域には起こりがちで、それが90年代における紛争につながってきた面を持ってきたということがあります。でしたがって、その実際に SDGs を全体を牽引していくさまざまなステークホルダーズの中には、政府ということになる面はあるわけですけれども、そこがきちんとした透明性やアカウンタビリティといったようなものを持つ、従来からそのガバナンスを強化を求められているようなテーマに関してやはりきちんと答えていくということが引き続き課題になるのではないというふうに考えています。
Thank you very much.
On technology, I think if we are going to look ahead, as our keynote speaker said, we have huge challenges. We have to utilize and encourage new technologies. But with a qualifier, I agree. I was mentioning the traditional knowledge. I think science, technology is only 250 years old. We have traditional knowledge, wisdom that is 5,000, 10,000 years old. We need to use the science and technology to enhance our traditional knowledge and wisdom. And second one, which was not asked, but if I may suggest fourth, I had mentioned 3 out-of-the-box issues from moving what to how do we implement. Since we are at UNU, education plays an important role, especially with the younger generation, the future leaders. UNU could be doing more, if I may say so, by providing guidelines on sustainable development to every university, school, and kindergarten. In Japan, you have done so well in responding to disasters. The little kindergarten children know what to do if an earthquake happens. If we can use the same process to mainstream sustainable development from kindergarten to university, it would be great. So challenge for you and you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. One thing that is quite important for SDGs but hasn't addressed very well during this session is the interconnectedness of the issues. So climate change, for example, is very much related to energy issues or food issues or water even. So by taking into account these interconnections, I think SDGs can address many different issues in a different manner as it was before. So that is something, that is a new opportunity that is facing to us. Related to education also is also apply this interconnectedness. We have worked on the education and water nexus. So increasing water literacy, we can also address education issue with quality education, but also water issue as well. So this kind of new way of thinking is, I think, desired in this context.
ありがとうございました。
来年の COP21 で地球枠組みに合意ができるかどうかでありますけれども、私は一貫して楽観的です。と言いますのも、サクス教授がおっしゃったようにですね、我々一回コペンハーゲンで失敗しているわけです。で、またこれ失敗しますとですね、もう取り返しがつかないという認識は全てのリーダーに、しっかり、認識していただいているんじゃないかと思います。そういう意味で9月23日の国連の気候サミットで中国の張高麗副総理が初めて総量削減に言及された。これまでは GDP あたりの減退目標しか中国は言ってなかったんですが、初めてなるべく早い時期にピークアウトすると、総量を落としていくんだという発言をされた点にですね、非常に私も注目をしております。いずれにしろアメリカと中国が合意しない限り新しい枠組みはできないわけで、そういう意味で、両国もですね、今後の取り組みを注意深く見守っていきたいと思います。
Thank you very much.
Let me start with this question of technology. It seems very frustrating indeed that every technology that we make has unintended consequences, and things that look wonderful turn out to be big trouble. You could argue, I think convincingly, that our whole modern world economy has developed on the basis of fossil fuel, for example. And the most important breakthrough technology in modern history, I think you could argue, was the steam engine, by showing that you could use coal to create motive force. It changed the whole history of the world. But now we know that the coal is a great danger. And so one could say, why more technology? The problem is the following, it seems to me. When the steam engine was invented, the modern steam engine in 1776, the world population was 800 million people. The world population today is 7.2 billion people. By 2024, it will be 8 billion. And by 2040, barring disaster, and we absolutely have to do everything we can to avoid disaster, it will be 9 billion or more. If you look at the issue of feeding 9 billion people, providing 9 billion people with drinking water, providing 9 billion people with access to health care or education, I think it's impossible without better technologies. The only other way to do it with the current technologies would be for a significant part of humanity to be left outside of the modern economy. Of course, that's the view of many people. Leave them outside. Don't let them bother us. Who cares whether they're poor and so forth. I regard such an approach, of course, as both immoral and as absolutely untenable, a guarantee for massive unrest in the world that would create huge disaster for everybody. So my problem basically is throughout, because of our history, a very complicated history, we've arrived at an extremely crowded planet, and even our current level of technological use is unsustainable with our current technologies. So unless we make a transformation, either we have a collapse of living standards for many people, either we close the door on development for billions of people, Or we say that the door is open, but through a different direction. For example, low carbon energy systems. There is no low carbon energy of a traditional sort that can supply the world's energy needs. If you tried to do it through traditional biomass, that would be the end of our forests in no time. That would be the end of our biodiversity in no time. That would be the end of our food supply in no time. So I'd rather go with photovoltaics on a massive scale as an alternative, for example. But that's very high tech. Now, advanced photovoltaics requires a massive deployment of science. 1 billion electric vehicles requires a massive deployment of new technologies. I don't see any way out. You may say it's a Faustian bargain, and in a way it is, but I don't see any way out. Maybe if the world's population peaks and gradually starts coming down as it is in Japan, and instead of 9 billion people, we have 7 billion or 5 billion or 3 billion people in the 22nd century, we'll have a little more breathing space in terms of the ability to simplify our lives. But right now, because of scale, I believe we are technologically dependent. And I also remain a prisoner of the Enlightenment idea that we can use technology and not destroy ourselves. So that is, I have to say, a measure of optimism that it's possible to do. And I think we need to try as hard as we can to do it. The final point that I want to make is when one asks what can a private company do beyond CSR, beyond corporate social responsibility, it is to be a company that truly adds value to the world. And when I say truly adds value, I mean doesn't add value because we miscount the value. An oil company may seem to add value, but if you add up the damage that it's doing, it's not adding as much value as its books would claim that it's adding. So companies should add true value through true accounting of what they're doing, not by imposing costs on others. So I think it is the responsibility of companies to say, we are part of the sustainable development agenda. We will keep our books honestly. We will support corrective pricing to reflect the social cost of carbon and other externalities that we are opposing. We will clean up after ourselves. If a company like Shell creates massive pollution in Nigeria, it should be cleaning up, not running away from the problem. And a company like I mentioned earlier, Mitsubishi Chemical, or another leading company in this country, Sumitomo Chemical, they have technologies that can dramatically improve the world. And I'll just end with the one example of Sumitomo Chemical, which I've worked closely with for the last 10 years. It developed the world's best anti-malaria bed nets through very clever engineering. It was a high technology process to create bed nets that would last 7 years rather than just traditional bed nets needed to be retreated every 3 months. But Sumitomo Chemical, because its engineering was so ingenious, came up with nets that last 5 years in fighting malaria. And when the then CEO of the company, Mr. Yanakura, who then became head of Keidan Ren, approached me in 2005, I first said, please donate nets to the Millennium Villages so that we can demonstrate the results. And then all over Africa, the government saw that they could bring down malaria. It was a big eye-opener for them. The Minister of Health of Kenya came and said, oh my God, I didn't know even about that this was possible. And then she ordered nets for the entire country to do this. So this was then Mr. Yanakura said to me, well, we're producing 1 million nets right now. Should we produce 3 or 4 million, Professor Sachs? And I said, no, Mr. Yanakura, you should produce 30 million nets. And he gulped. He said, oh my God, are you serious? And I said, yes, this is what Africa needs. And the company did that, actually. And it provided the most important contribution to the fight against malaria of any company. And so this is what a great company can do by being innovative, dynamic, visionary, forward-looking, and partnering with the public sector. It can play a huge role in this transformation.
Thank you very much. それではこの辺りでそろそろ時間となりました。皆さんの活発な参画のおかげで大変活発な議論ができたと思います。それではサックス教授はじめパネリストの皆さんにどうぞ大きな拍手をお願いいたします。
Thank you very much, everyone, for coming to this very important and interesting symposium. 10 years ago, I was appointed to ambassador to the United Nations, and then frankly speaking, I had almost no idea about MDGs. Actually, that was the reality in Japan. But when I met with Jeffrey Sachs, and I began to work on how to promote our goals, MDGs. And then I'm almost moved today to see such a big audience who are all enthusiastic about this discussion. In MDGs, we made some successes globally mainly because of the development in Asia, China and India. Some successes in Africa, not so much in Sub-Saharan. But some success has created another difficulty, which is pollution. Sustainability became more important issue. And also population growth. You may know that 20, 30 years from now on, the biggest population country will be India, followed by China. Third, maybe the United States. Fourth will be Nigeria, Pakistan, which is not a very pleasant situation. That's why we have to face a new situation. The post-2015 development agenda is, that's why it is so important before us. But as you see, we are now seeing more and more difficult issues before us, which is a conflict. And now the peace, which is the basis for development, is now threatened in Middle East, Ukraine, many places. Without peace, we cannot do anything. And then those conflicts are partly because of the globalization. You know, globalization means a more connectedness with different peoples, different economies, different regions. And then, but those peoples, those nations have a different traditions, different customs, and so forth. So the globalization brings about a kind of crisis for their identity. That's the fundamental reasons of those difficulties, why historical issues are taking up so much, religious conflicts are taking up so much, and so forth. But therefore, that's why my good friend Jeffrey Sachs is recently talking about peace more than economic issues. How to maintain peace? It's not an easy job. But in the long run, we have to create a world in which many civilizations can coexist based upon universal values such as human rights and then democracy, peaceful solution of the conflicts. But in order to do so, every party has to make some compromises. You know, we have to make some compromise on the principle of democracy. Democracy is important, but we have to take time. Also, say Islamic countries should make some compromise on their religious behavior. Anyhow, we have to create a world in which many civilizations should coexist together, and then commonly committed to the universal values. In this direction, I believe that Japan has to play a very important role, because we have experience of underdeveloped country, being discriminated by the advanced countries. At the same time, we have been advanced countries, democratized countries, industrialized countries for decades. We know the mentalities of both sides. And also we have understanding of Christianity, but we know what is the democracy is, what is the human rights are. Therefore, Japan has to play a very important facility role. And I think Prime Minister Abe's approach is on the right track, roughly speaking. And he is traveling all over the world, speaking to every people. And then I'm, in that sense, I'm supportive for his security policy and foreign policy, if not everything. But despite of the heated discussion today, those people who know the importance of MDGs or SDGs are very few in number. They are minorities in Japan. So please, after returning to your home, please speak to the people, your friend, your family, about the importance of this issue, so that many more people can have a better understanding of the very important issue of us. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much.